We have bombshell news right now. Donald Trump and the Trump administration are working secretly behind the scenes to take over upcoming elections, take control of elections ahead of 2026 and 2028, potentially even invoking national emergency powers to take control of these elections. And I need to talk about it right now because not many people are. So please like, comment, share and subscribe so that people hear what I am saying. So, a new New York Times report came out today, which shows that Donald Trump's allies, many of whom pushed the 2020 conspiracy theories, are now deeply embedded inside the federal government, and they're planning to potentially rig the 2026 2028 elections from the inside. Heather Honey, a former leader in Donald Trump's election integrity network, now holds a key position in the federal government directly overseeing election integrity at the Department of Homeland Security. She has openly discussed, according to reports, using the president's emergency powers to override state laws, strip Congress of oversight of elections, and turn debunked fraud claims into official federal policies. At the same time, other election integrity network trained activists like Marcy McCarthy are actively being installed in federal roles across the government, and Trump aligned groups on the outside are now pushing this US Citizens Election Bill of Rights, which is essentially a far right blueprint that would restrict mail in voting, purge voter rolls across the country, and override the certification of local election boards. Now, that is significant because that is essentially the Project 2025 version, but for voting, Project 2025 version for elections. And it's not just a theory, it's happening and it's happening right now. And the New York Times is slowly exposing it. So it was the main story on most of the day's page today, and people need to know what is happening in the country. So let's talk about the key players in this election stealing, election rigging scheme. The first, her name is Heather Honey. She's the Deputy Assistant Secretary for Election Integrity at the Department of Homeland Security. She previously ran the Pennsylvania arm of the Election Integrity Network and testified in Carrie Lake's election denial case. Remember Carrie Lake? She's currently runs the Voice of America, but she previously claimed that her election, when she ran for governor of Arizona, was rigged and sued a bunch of times, lost every single time. Well, Heather Honey testified in that case. Heather Honey has advocated and amplified false claims about the 2020 election and has advocated for the use of federal powers to override state laws. She's now a senior role at the Department of Homeland Security in charge of election integrity. The second, Marcy McCarthy. Marcy McCarthy is an EIN trained activist. She's the former DeKalb County Republican chairwoman in Georgia. She currently serves as the Public Affairs Director at CISA, which is a cybersecurity and infrastructure security agency, helping manage election related messaging and promises and priorities coming out of CISA, which is a key cybersecurity arm of the federal government. The third, Cleta Mitchell. Cleta Mitchell, if you don't know her, is Donald Trump's longtime ally. She actually had to resign from her law firm because of the 2020 election denial claims that she pushed. She worked overtime to try to overturn the results of the 2020 election in Georgia. She's the founder of the Election Integrity Network. She actually applauded the appointments of Heather Honey and Marcy McCarthy and others as the kind of, quote, election integrity leaders every American can be proud to have at the Department of Homeland Security. And finally, the most important figure of them all is Donald Trump himself, who has personally elevated figures like Honey, like Marcy McCarthy, and continues to promote many of the false claims that Honey herself is circulating. His administration is now actively transforming these conspiracies into real federal doctrine. And while this is a hostile takeover of American democracy, and it's happening behind the scenes under the radar, a small group of Trump loyalists is embedding election conspiracy theorists in key federal roles. And their goal is to manipulate the rules, bypass checks and balances, and make it harder for everyday Americans to vote, especially voters of color. So here's the plan. The plan is for Heather Honey to use a quote national emergency to let Donald Trump override Congress and force states to follow election rules issued by the federal government. She essentially this would be based on the same fraud claims that courts across the country have already rejected. The strategy from the outside, from EIN, Election Integrity Network, is to advance this playbook called the US Citizens Election Bill of Rights, which I said earlier restricts voting options, legalizes purges of voter rolls, and lets partisan delays or overturning of election results. Cleta Mitchell has her own agenda. She's worked to build EIN to train activists across the country to push junk audits and flood elections with challenges. She's actually putting her network in power now to work. So here's the thing, you have multiple moving parts. You have the work inside the government with folks like Heather Honey. You have folks outside of the government like Cleta Mitchell and this election integrity network organization that she built. And you have the president himself who completely buys all of the claims that many of these people are pushing. Remember, Heather Honey would not be in the Department of Homeland Security right now if Donald Trump did not agree with many of the ideas that she's been pushing, many of these election denials and election conspiracies. And so we're in a situation right now where they are working behind the scenes to make it so that Donald Trump could theoretically declare this national emergency, take power from states, and control elections as we know it. And let me read you some key quotes from the New York Times story first. Ms. Honey complained that her department's cybersecurity experts tasked with combating misinformation about elections had strayed from their mission. She thinks they're straying from their mission. Quote, we can take these other steps without Congress and we can mandate that states do things. I don't know if that's really feasible and if the people around the president would let him test that theory. That's a theory she is actively floating. Cleta Mitchell, quote, these are the very kind of election integrity leaders every American can be proud of to have at DHS. Direct quote from Cleta Mitchell. And then you had Donald Trump, who during his speech on January 6th, he said, quote, in Pennsylvania, you had 205,000 more votes than you had voters, pushing an election conspiracy that is obviously not true and has been debunked repeatedly. Not true. Folks need to know about what's happening right now and how this could impact American elections as we know it. We're still a year away from the elections, but that doesn't mean that what's happening behind the scenes isn't happening in real time. So spread the word, like, comment, share, and subscribe, and I'll see you soon for more.